This is video 2 of week 3. Let's just start with the structural theories of language acquisition. And here you have two prominent figures of these kind of theories. You have the legendary Noam Chomsky, who might be the one who made the biggest effort to formulate these theories and who collected the most followers, either for or against his ideas. And the other one that is just very popular is Steven Pinker. So whenever you see Noam Chomsky, Steven Pinker cited, then you know where you are. So the point of departure of these theories is that language is an evolutionary adaptation of human biology that specialize the human mind, but not the minds of other species, for language. So they make a huge emphasis on saying that language is not unlike any other part of the biology of humans. What they say is that given the right stimuli, and that would be linguistic stimuli in this case, we develop language, and that's how it goes. It doesn't take much more. So we need just a little bit of a trigger. Obviously, without that trigger, nothing happens, but just a little bit of that trigger, and then we develop language. And this is not unlike any other biological process that we go through. Given the right food and the right psychological and physical environment, we develop puberty. Or we learn to walk, or any of the other, we develop vision or whatever, any of the other cognitive abilities. So language is just one more within that set of properties that make us human. Now, how do we do it? We do it through what they call the language acquisition device, the LAD. So we have something in our mind, and a lot of this is just metaphorical if you want, but there is some kind of property that we have in our mind that is able to derive a whole language out of the linguistic stimuli that we are exposed to. Now, what that language acquisition device would be like, that is precisely part of the scientific, is the goal of the scientific inquiry, to determine what is it that we need to develop language and how we do it, what properties do we have, what abilities do we have in our minds that develop in our minds, I mean in our cognitive makeshift, that makes us develop language out of the linguistic stimuli in our environment. And that is specific for humans, and because the same stimuli does not make other species develop language. Our dog might be exposed to language all the time, but as far as we know, our dogs have not started to speak. So there's something very specifically human on the human biology that makes us develop language when we are exposed to it. And that is what we mean when we say that language is a human instinct, is part of our predispositions, our cognitive predispositions, if you want, that are anchored in our biology. And then structuralists, these kind of theorists, they hold that much of our linguistic knowledge is not quite learned. So it does not come to us through our experiences with the world. It does not come to us thanks to our ability to learn things. But rather, the child, the baby, enters the world with an innate predisposition to acquire language that guides the learning process. Okay, so we basically already we equipped with whatever it is that would make us acquire language that is different from what a dog comes into existence with, because they will not develop a language. And probably what that innate predisposition does is it already kind of biases us into knowing what shape a possible human language can take, and what are the limits of the shape that the language can have. Now, the content of this mechanism, of this LAD, is called universal grammar. These restrictions of what shape a language, human language can take, is what we call universal grammar. And it's a set of principles, we might be fixed or we might have options, that restrict possible languages. They tell us how a human language can look like. Now, one very popular theory that had a lot of influence and is very clear, and that's why I present it here, and it has seen some development, but the basic tenets are the same, is the principles and parameters theory introduced by Chomsky and linguistics. The basic tenet of that theory is that in human language there are principles, which are features that are common to all languages, and parameters which vary across languages. Okay, so there will be properties of language that will be universal. All languages would have those properties, and there will be other characteristics of languages in which variation might be possible. So one language might have property A, and another language might have property B, property A and B being parameters, but all languages might have property C, and C would be a principle. So let me give you an example, a very basic example, which is not supposed to be comprehensive of the complexity of the issue, but just for you to understand. So we have, for example, the basic principle that all sentences have subjects in all languages. Subjects being when you say, I like tomatoes, I is the subject. When you say, I eat apples, that I is the subject. When you say, the dog sleeps, there is an act of sleeping, and that sentence has a subject, which is the dog, right? So all sentences have subjects in all languages. Now, in English, you have John came. In Italian, you have Giovanni è venuto, for example, just clearly examples, right? So that's a principle because it is universal for all languages. It's just a rule, if you want, that happens in all languages. Now, in only some languages you can omit the subject. So in English, you cannot say came, meaning John came, right? But in Italian, you can say è venuto, meaning Giovanni è venuto. Right? And then you still understand that it's Giovanni who came, if the context is right. But what is important here is that you can omit it in Italian, but you cannot omit it in English. And that is a difference. Because it is a difference, that's called a parameter. So all sentences have subjects. That would be the general rule. That would be a principle. And whether you can drop the subject and still have a felicitous, a good sentence or not, that would be a parameter. In this case, it's called the pro-drop parameter, pro meaning the pronoun, meaning the subject dropping parameter. And English would have a negative value for that. So no, you cannot drop the subject. And Italian would have a positive value for that parameter. Would be yes, in certain circumstances, certain linguistic circumstances, you can drop the subject and still have a good sentence. Okay. Now, the child expects language, whatever language is in the environment or languages are in the environment of the child expects to find subjects. So here's a sentence, says, where's my subject? Okay. Now, the child needs to find out whether in the language that is in the environment of the child, whether that subject can, under certain circumstances, be omitted, or whether that subject needs to be present all the time. Okay, so that would be whether in the languages that the child needs to acquire, whether the parameter, the pro-drop parameter, would have a positive value or a negative value. Okay, but the principle, the child will not have to think twice about it. There are subjects in sentences, so that's it, right? But the parameter, the child will have to determine it. Now, how the child determines whether the language in their environment is positive or negative, has positive or negative value with respect to a parameter. That is the big mystery to understand or to find out what evidence the child uses to deduce the value of a given parameter. Now, this is sometimes labeled as the continuity view of language acquisition, meaning the baby and the adult grammars have the same categories. The baby already has a category subject, already has a category prodrop or non-prodrop, and that's the same category that the adult has. The adult also has the category subject in the grammar. So that is typical from this kind of approach. Now, a very important idea in the theory of language acquisition of these kind of theories is this one of poverty or the stimulus that you have read about. The basic observation is, or the basic judgment is that it is impossible for children to learn languages on the basis of the input that they are presented. It is just too little. They hear too little and deduce too much on the basis of the little that they hear, and they deduce it with incredible accuracy. So the children need very few examples of a given linguistic feature, and those are called the trigger experiences, the few that they get. And then they also, with the caveat that many times those examples that are actually that the children hear are adapted because parents adapt their language, simplifying it. So even in the case before, even a parent who speaks Italian might be dropping the subjects way less than they would be dropping them in normal circumstances when they speak to a child, because they understand that children might need a little bit more help. And nevertheless, children don't acquire this simplified version of their language. They actually acquire the adult version of the language, even if the input that they are receiving is very simplified or sometimes even modified. You don't say, Johnny, do you want some orange juice? You say, Johnny, more orange juice, or Johnny, orange juice. And that is, of course, simplified, and still no adult speaks, other than another child, no adult speaks with that baby grammar. Now, also a very important notion is that children deduce the correct form of the language in absence of negative evidence. Negative evidence is when you say not only how things are, but how things are not. So you, to a child, you only speak telling them how language looks like, but you don't tell them how it doesn't look like, by definition, because we speak the way language is, not the way language is not. So that's negative evidence. And in the input, when you look at the input of that the children receive, they do not receive negative evidence. You don't tell them, look, we don't say cat the, we say the cat. You just say the cat all the time. How does the child deduce that you never say cat the, that you always say the cat? If it never asks, Mommy, do you ever say cat the? They never ask that, but they deduce that the only way of saying it is the cat, right? When it would not be necessarily a logical conclusion, because as we will see other times, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The child does not know whether you cannot say cat the because you absolutely cannot say cat the in English, or because it has not yet encountered an instance of cat the, but it would in principle be possible to say that in English. So what do we know when we know a language from the structural perspective? What does the child acquires when we say that they have acquired a language? They have acquired what combinations of sounds occur in this language. So what we call the sound inventory or phonetic inventory of that language and its phonological rules. when they have acquired how to combine sounds to form words and sentences, so the morphology and syntax of this language, and how to relate sounds with meanings, so this language is semantics, including its manipulations. So from the structural perspective, a child has acquired a language when a child knows the rules, the grammar of this language, and that is the structural approach. A very important final idea that I want to introduce to you about the structural approach is their idea of how language is represented in the mind and eventually in the brain. So these theories believe in the modularity of language. The modularity of language is the idea that language is pretty much a modular cognitive ability with its own idiosyncratic principles, that the structural principles of language do not have to have a correlate on other cognitive abilities. It can be that language has its own rules, so to speak, that do not have to have an equivalent on any other abilities, meaning on vision or on spatial configuration or in motor ability or anything like that. That means that the brain is considered to be a modular organ with specialized processors, some of which are dedicated to the discovery of linguistic structure, this LAD that I was talking to you about. It makes sense that if language has properties that are specifically linguistic and nothing else, that it might be that evolutionarily speaking, we have developed already some kind of linguistic centers in our brain that predispose us to acquire and then store linguistic ability. And language acquisition then is the process of discovery by this dedicated module of the inherent structure of language. If we have already a specific part of our mind that is in humans is dedicated to finding out the structural principles and eventually the functional principles of language. And this is it. This is all of the things that I'm going to tell you about the structural theory of language.